Hey there, everybody, Travis Bowman here. I have been presented with such a unique opportunity to have such a rare, unique gaming console in my house, and it is here right now with its custodian, Adam Koralik. We have the Sega Pluto on my table in the flesh, so to speak, right here in front of us. So, what is this, Adam Koralik?
Oh, it's my turn.
It's
Okay.
your turn, yes.
Excellent word choice on custodian.
Yeah.
It's not that rare because, frankly, if you get me, you always get this thing. It always just tied to me.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Sega Pluto prototype. Long and the short of it, Sega of America was redesigning the Sega Saturn for the US. Within '96 is primarily when they were working on this project, and the idea was initially have more of a cost-effective version of the Saturn that's rebuilt around what they think Americans might like. And they were correct in projecting that the internet was the future. And to that end, they had a built-in modem and a built-in hard drive. Hold that.
I'm going to hold that.
You are holding the first hard drive in any video game system in human history.
That is incredible.
We have a duplicate of it. This is the actual hard drive inside. It's a 520 megabyte hard drive, which laughable now, but back at the time, that's like what top of the line PCs had.
That's heavy storage there.
Yeah.
Heavy storage.
And they have modules on the back that they fit in there. So the idea was that this thing would go online and be able to download game content through Sega Channel, which back in the day was kind of like Xbox Game Pass, and that was enough space you could have like any one game at a time. We know that are you old enough to remember Net Zero?
Yes,
So
just barely though.
Yeah, Net Zero was actually creating the OS for this thing,
Okay.
specifically allowing it to do that. The project ultimately, they make 6 of these. 4 were white mock-ups that didn't do anything. They were just like resin, super heavy shells. 3 of those were destroyed. 1 was donated to the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas, where it still is. The other 2 black ones, one was this one, and the other one was the final unit that ended up in Japan and was ultimately denied, and the project died in in 96. Had it not, it would have been released in 97 and retailed at $550 US, which today would be like $1,500. So you think the PS5 Pro is bad?
Yeah.
So the reason ultimately that it was primarily killed, from what we can understand, was just that the Japanese did not want the Americans releasing it simply because it was too cost ineffective, which is kind of interesting because they were definitely right about that. But at the same time, the idea of the Sega Saturn having a built-in hard drive and jumping the internet market like that early, from a technological perspective, is incredibly impressive.
Right.
So then the question inevitably is like, why do we have it? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Japanese one, let's start there. The Japanese one kind of just, once the project was done, some employee had it and it just kind of sat in their house, apparently until an estate sale in 2013. If you Google Sega Pluto, that's the one you'll always see photos of, which is my infinite frustration, because it'll say Sega Saturn on the lid where this one does not. That's how you know it's the final one. That was the one that created the news story. That's where everybody heard about it. And everybody in the world was freaking out about it except for one guy who's a buddy of mine named Roger. And he's like, no, those are common. I've got one of those. No, you don't have one of those. He's like, no, I really do.
And that's the one. That's the one right there.
And everybody's like, how do you have that? Why do you have that? Etc. And he was like, I don't really care that much about it. I'd be willing to sell it. And he was willing to do that. But then people were like, you shouldn't sell it. It should be in a museum. I hate you. I'm going to send you death threats. And he was like, my life was peaceful and this thing was in a shoebox. It's going back to that. So what is Roger's story, right? So basically what happened with Roger is in 1999, he was just a kid. And he goes to a flea market in Ceres, California, which is just outside of San Francisco. And he finds this guy who's just selling stuff. And the way he describes it or remembers it is that the guy had a bunch of weird stuff all the time, but in this pile of what looked like CD players, he saw this thing. And he looks at it and has no idea what it is, but he sees the Sega Saturn logo. And because this is 1999, he was a child, this is pre-Google, this is pre-smartphone, he had no way to get any information on it, so he just assumed that's a Japanese Saturn. That's what all Japanese Saturns look like. That's what they look like.
Must be.
It must be. Yeah. And so he's like, how much for it? And the guy's like, $5.
Which is insane.
Well, what's even funnier is Roger didn't have $5, so he's like, I got 3, and the guy took it. And he's like, that's fine.
Oh my God.
So he got it for $3. He takes it home, turns it on, puts a game in it, doesn't do anything, and he goes, it's broken, doesn't work. Puts it in that shoebox. Again, until 2013 when the whole story comes up. And it was now out there, though, that Roger had this thing, right? And so some people in his local community knew he was the dude who had it, but nobody really did anything about it. In the very end of 2019, right before all that pandemic stuff starts, I'm at a store in Campbell, California, again near San Francisco, And the owner of the store is just chit-chatting with me, and he's like, Adam, do you know the Sega Pluto? I'm like, yeah, I know the Sega Pluto. Yeah, I mean, like, what kind of loser
Naturally.
wouldn't know what the Sega Pluto is? Okay, like seriously, you guys are virgins. Okay. Anyway, so he's like, well, the owner of it lives about 10 minutes away. Would you like to see it? And I was like,
Yeah, please,
yeah,
please.
I might be down for that. So 10 minutes later, Roger shows up and he's like, here you go. He
Oh
just
my
shows
God.
up. Guy's awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm just in awe, the first time I ever see it. And I was like, well, I had so many questions. He's like, dude, I have no idea. Like, he didn't know the answer to those type of questions. And I was like, can I turn it on? Can I use it? Can I work? Like try and play a game on it? He's like, oh, it doesn't work. I'm like, what doesn't work about it? It doesn't power up? And he's like, no, it powers up. It's just that it doesn't play games. And I was like, what did you try? He's like, well, I put a bunch of, Japanese games in it because it's Japanese. And I was like, it's American, dude. You bought it in California. And he was like, I never thought of that. Never thought of that.
So he never thought to
He never
test
thought-
an American
no,
game?
never thought of it. He was like, it never popped in my mind because I never thought of that. And so we put in a copy of Virtual Hide that the store had. It worked immediately.
Oh my God.
And he was like,
that's
wow, no idea. And I was like, dude, we need to do something with this. You can't just
Definitely.
like put this back in a shoebox and no one ever sees it. And he's like, well, what do you have in mind? And I was like, well, the first thing we should do is we should take it to, there's another YouTuber named Ben Heck who does videos on restorations. He's the guy who had worked on the PlayStation Zero or Nintendo PlayStation prototype, famously recompiling that. And I was like, we can take it to him and see what he has to say about it. Please understand that at the time that Roger had it initially there were only sort of 3 issues. One, the first controller port on the system, port number 1, didn't work properly. There's a common issue on Saturns where the controller tends to bend the pins.
Yep.
And so in order to get it to work, you have to lift it up like this. It would work if you did that, but we're like, that's not a good solution.
Sure.
So we took it to, Ben. He was like, just, okay, this is done. Like that took 2 seconds to fix. And he was like, I'll recap, I'll put new caps in it, new capacitors. The ones in there are fine, but it's such a unique item that we should really put newer ones in. So he does that. And then the only other thing he did, the only thing that was truly wrong with it is, you see, in old photos of Roger holding it, it always looks like this, with the lid up. And the reason for that,
Stuck like that?
you see this white piece of plastic
Yeah.
that holds the lid
Holds
down?
it down. It
That
was gone.
didn't exist.
It was gone.
Sega never built
Wow.
it. Don't know why. Couldn't tell you. No clue.
Wow.
But they didn't build it. So basically, Ben designs one, 3D prints it, installs it.
Yeah.
Done. And here it is. So what ends up happening out of that trip is Roger and I went to Madison, Wisconsin, which is where Ben is. We do the whole thing. And ultimately, we found that this thing, we didn't know this was a hard drive.
Certainly doesn't look like one.
No, we had no idea what it was. And it was like the last thing we figured out. We opened it up, we're like, wow, there's a hard drive in here. We should dump this, see what's on it, et cetera, et cetera. And we realized he couldn't do it with a Windows-based rig because Windows will write to it just to try and access it. So he figured out Linux could do it, and we just ran out of time. So he left this in Wisconsin on purpose. Eventually, by the way, there was nothing on the hard drive. We did dump it. It was totally blank. It was Sega literally just took a blank one, put it in there for proof of concept. But that meant that the hard drive was staying in Wisconsin. And Roger, who lives in California, had no desire to go back there to get it. We didn't want him mailing something so rare. And I live in Chicago, so I was within region. So I was like, tell you what, I'll just go get it if you trust me to do that. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So I went and I got it. And eventually that led to like, one day I should bring the hard drive back to you and put the system back together, et cetera, et cetera. I was done with it. I didn't need to make videos on it anymore. I didn't have anything else to do with it. But are you familiar with the Sega Neptune?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It is a Sega Genesis 32X combo. There's only one of those real ones ever made. It's in, as I mentioned before, the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. And I thought, man, I'd love to go in there and make a video on that. But no museum lets you just walk in the door and be like, hey, give me the stuff behind the glass. I'm gonna make videos on your rare things.
Yeah.
So I was like, what could I do that would get me some measure of credibility that they would ever think about that? And exactly the solution. So I go to Roger and I text him like, all right, feel free to just tell me to F myself, whatever, I don't care, but here's what I'm pitching to you. Well, I just told him directly, and he goes, if it was anyone else on this planet, that's exactly what I would say, but for you, if you really want to come out to California, pick this thing up, take it back to Chicago, then take it down to Dallas, Texas, take it to a museum and try to wedge your way into a different, whatever, I'm all about it. Prototype reunion, let's go. And I was like, sweet. So long and the short of it, that worked. I took it to the museum in Texas and I met up with John. And we're in there, and I'm talking to him for a second, and I was like, "Have you ever heard of the Sega Pluto?" He's like, "Yeah, we got one in back." That was the first time I'd heard they had the white one. I had no idea.
Oh, wow.
So he goes and grabs it because he was just kind of like, nobody ever asks about that thing. So he comes and he brings it out and he shows it to me, and I take this out and he goes like, "What?" He just couldn't believe what he was seeing, and I was like, "How come yours is white? How come yours is black? How come yours buttons doesn't work? How come yours buttons do work?" Like we had that kind of moment. Like,
right.
And he's like, "Why does yours have a laser assembly?" Because it works. It works? Like he just couldn't believe it. Like we were just having this like simpatico moment over these weird prototypes. And before I had a chance to mention it, he's like, "Let me go get the Neptune. I got a great idea." And he just runs off and then comes back with it. So there's a very criminally underviewed video on my channel where we had 2 Plutos and a Neptune in one video, family prototype reunion. And I know from people at Sega, they really wanted to tweet about it, but officially they're not allowed to. But they were like, "That's really cool."
That's super cool.
But so we had a lot of fun doing that. And obviously I'm in contact with Roger. He is still the owner of this thing. But basically I'm like, "When do you want it back?" He's like, "If you bring it back to me, dude, it's just going in the shoebox. Like I'm not selling it. I don't want to do anything with it. I'm not going to any of these conventions or anything. So I don't really care." So basically the policy ever since has been, he lets me hold on to it. I'll take it to shows, like, we bring it to a con. Like, again, there's the one that Rick just did.
Yeah.
If that show in the future wants it as a thing, like, you can have that. We can play it. People can play it at the show, whatever, just see it. That's an option. But any show that we do that for, or when I travel on my own, I typically bring it with me. And then I take photos of it in front of stuff. This is the most well-traveled console on this
Most
planet.
definitely. Most definitely at this point.
And I mean that. Like, I actually keep a map of all the places it's been.
That's super cool.
It's been to Guam twice.
That's insane.
I'm just saying, it's been to the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's been to Saipan. It's been everywhere, dude.
I've been everywhere.
It's been to Alaska. It's been to Hawaii. It's been to Europe a bunch of times, different parts of it. It's been to Africa.
Yeah.
Morocco. The only continents it hasn't been to is Antarctica.
Obviously.
South America. That's going to change soon. We're going to Brazil. And Australia, which is inevitable. It must happen. Yeah. It gets around.
Well, the thing I love about this, it's just so unbelievably Sega. They've had so many great ideas over the years that just weren't right for the time, or they were too ahead of their time. To have a hard drive in a console like this in the 90s is insane, dude. To have a modem built into it like that is insane. And I think of other things, like the Sega Channel for the Sega Genesis, being able to just download the games back then, too, as well as the Dreamcast VMU, one of my favorite memory card ideas ever. You have a little Game Boy type device in your controller that you can download stuff onto and take away and play it later. And they were trying to implement not only an MP3 player, but a DVD player into the Dreamcast as well. So stuff like that is just so fascinating to me, and it's always attracted me to Sega because of that weird stuff. But unfortunately, those designs and that implementation just never took off, or they died before they had a chance to, which is really a shame. And it's like you're seeing one of your best buddies do amazing things, but then ultimately fail. You know? And it sucks so bad. It sucks so bad. But still, to have that piece of history here, and you being the guy to take it around is so fitting too. It's so fitting that you're the dude that gets to carry that.
It's something I fell
everywhere.
into accidentally, as I told you in that story. There was no plan for that, but it opened up other doors. Like now, I'm on a pretty good first name basis with the people who run the National Video Game Museum, and they sure told me like, "Yeah, anytime you're down here, dude, just come by. We'll let you film whatever we got. We don't care."
Right. Yeah.
Just like, all right, sweet. I can have access to their archives. Or Portland Retro Game Expo this year. I got access to the Nintendo PlayStation again. So that, for years, was like a famous thing that Terry Diebold, RIP, was a friend of mine. He got to take it around and stuff, but he sold it right before he passed away. It was bought by a group known as the Museum of the Game. And they had kind of had it in a vault, primarily because of the pandemic. And so they were like, we should leave it there. And right before PRGE, they reached out to me because they saw a photo of me as a guest on PRGE's website holding the Nintendo PlayStation. They're like, well, this guy might know something about it. So they were talking back and forth, and I was like, yeah, if you want to bring it, that would be amazing. And so we did this panel that was killer. Like, it's online. You should watch it. Like, I had this with me, and I had the Atari Jaguar dental equipment. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have.
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
We've got one of those.
Yeah.
And so we also, originally we were just going to talk about those two things. That's all it was. But then the Museum of the Game shows up, and they're like, yeah, we have the Atari Graduate, which was a one-of-one that Atari made that would upgrade your 2600 to a PC. We just never released it because the video game crash happened. So
Right.
he's got, they've got the only one. And then they also brought some other just random things. They're like, yeah, here is the first modern day remote control. It was hand built by Steve Wozniak of Apple fame. We just have that. We have the first mouse ever from 1967. They have it.
Right.
He's like brings me this table of insane things.
Insane rare stuff that you just never see.
You'll never see. So what I ended up doing, I was like, okay, I had enough guest speakers on my panel. I was like, all right, Sega Shiro guys, you're going to talk about the Pluto. I'm going to talk about the Jaguar dental equipment, and I brought some of my like Discord regulars. I'm like, okay, Sunshine, you're going to talk about these computer parts because you're big into PCs. My buddy Captain Potato, you're going to talk about the Atari Graduate. We're just going to let everybody think like this is all there is to it. And then at the very end, I was going to do the Steve Jobs like, oh, one more thing, Nintendo PlayStation. There was a fire alarm. And so my time was very cut short. Yeah. So rather than like get everybody all amped up and then like do 20 minutes of Q&A, and oh, by the way, I had to cut out the Q&A entirely and then just do, oh, by the way, Nintendo PlayStation in the back, bitch.
Yeah, that's so
but
cool.
It was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just so cool that this thing freaking exists, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the delicious B-roll of this that you've been seeing in this video, because I am just tickled to death with the opportunity. This is my first time holding the Sega Pluto.
Yeah.
And it's kind of heavy.
Well, it's heavier with
kind of
these in
heavy.
it.
Definitely, I can imagine.
Yeah.
But compared to the Sega Saturn, it's a little heavier. And I was really surprised at how much larger it is.
Well, it
as
has
a
to house
console.
those. Yeah.
But my God, it is so cool, and it's just, it's a thing. It exists.
It does
It's so
exist.
hard to believe it, but here it is.
Yeah, and again, most well-traveled console on the planet, so it's been to the Goonies' house. Somebody had to do that. If it wasn't me, who was going to do it?
Oh, exactly. And like I said before, Adam he's the guy. If there was one person to be the official custodian, the knight that follows around the Sega Pluto to protect it from everything, and also to be its ambassador, it's him. So if you guys haven't checked out Adam Koralik's YouTube channel, you should definitely do that. He has an additional channel where he takes this thing everywhere, in addition to what he's doing called Flying and Eating.
I very much enjoyed the Bill Clinton library on this trip.
Yeah, so that's another thing that I find hilarious, is that you take pictures of it in so many random
It's been to the grave
places.
of like half of the U.S. presidents.
Yes.
Like, of course, this thing has been to Calvin Coolidge's grave. But like, what else would you do? Like, how would you live with yourself if it hadn't been there? He knows what Franklin Pierce is all about. He's been there.
Yes. And
Martin Van Buren, what's up?
I liked his hairstyle
with the chops.
With the chops.
And actually, to kind of bring it back around to the video games part, Sega knows we've got it, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
So they reached out to me last year. They had known, actually, so here's a funny one. So they've known we've had it for years. The only concern that was ever made clear to us was so when this thing was bought by Roger, which was a completely legal transaction, and he is completely henceforth the owner, and Sega recognizes that just fine. At one point, Roger was speculating on the guy who had originally sold it to him, and he would just be like, well, he probably stole it from the office, because technically that's probably what happened. But he was like, Sega sends him a message, or sends us a message to send to him, be like, stop using the word stolen.
That's not good.
If you use that word, our lawyers have to care. We
Exactly.
we like what you're doing. So
Yes.
stop it.
That's
so
cool.
it was taken from the office. It was borrowed. It doesn't matter. Point is,
He has
the
it
legal
now.
owner. He
Yes.
has it. That was
Yes.
the only negative that Sega ever came at us with. Other than that, they were like, "Wait, we love what you're doing. It's great." They even invited me over to their office in London last year to bring it home and tour with it and take photos and everything. And of course, my joke at the time was like, "You're not going to like make it stay there." They're like, "No, you're all good. We just want the PR of like, it's here. How cool is that?" Because I'll tell you right now, like, Sony is not super happy about the existence of the Nintendo PlayStation prototype being out there, but they tolerate it because the PR was very good for them.
Exactly.
But Nintendo, there's a reason nobody does this with Nintendo stuff, because Nintendo will send lawyers after you just for having that stuff.
Yes.
So Sega does what Nintendo don't.
And you do such a great job of telling that story. The whole reason that the Nintendo PlayStation even exists. You've got a great video on that I'll put in the link in the description that you guys should check out.
Oh yeah, the whole history of the system.
Yeah, but seriously, man, big thanks to and kudos to Roger, the
Oh,
guy
he's
that owns
the perfect
this.
owner. Yeah, like here's the thing. I'm gonna sing his praises. I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second here. So there is a common thing with this where people are like, "That should be in a museum. You should just do it."
Yeah.
Museum.
Yep, you shouldn't have
And
it.
I'm like,
you shouldn't have it.
do you realize how stupid you sound? I want to be very clear of this. You sound like an idiot. You sound like an idiot. Because there's always this like mythical museum that will magically take care of everything. I know you're probably thinking the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. Well, I got news for you. They're not government funded. It's a private business like anything else.
Exactly.
So they would have to buy it outright. And that would cost them a lot of money. It would also probably not be what Roger is, it's not what it's worth, effectively. So the only person who's going to give you that kind of money is a private collector. You want to put it in the hands of a private collector spending that kind of capital on it, I guarantee you they're not donating it to a museum.
Right.
It's really easy for you to say donate it to a museum. Remember we were at Bill Clinton's childhood house the other day. Remember that?
Yes.
Now, because that was a president came from there, their house has inherent value. What if we went to the door, knocked on it, and said, "You guys should really donate your house.
Yeah.
You should just donate it."
They would kick our asses.
And rightly so. Because if anybody out there watching, if you possess something valuable, a car, a house, whatever it is, and I had the arrogance to tell you, you should donate that, or you're not a good person. Do you think you might want to kick the shit out of me?
Yeah, exactly.
And rightly so.
Exactly.
So my point is, we have created for you a traveling museum where it comes to you. And you don't have to pay anything to see it. That's infinitely better.
Exactly.
And you owe that all to Roger's coolness factor. Because not too many people would be cool with you taking their retirement plan and traveling around the world with it so that everyone has the benefit of enjoying it.
Yeah.
But if you really get off on the idea of this thing sitting behind glass, behind a paywall that you'll never be able to see, then you're messed up in the head, dude.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is definitely the best situation for something like this. To be able to have it, literally, like you said, be traveling to all these different conventions, to have as many eyes on it as possible, because it is a really important part of Sega's history.
Yeah,
for sure.
And let's keep it real here. At some point, Roger will probably sell it. And then all you museum purists can be very happy that a private collector put it in a vault and you'll never have to see it again.
Yeah.
Win for you, I'm sure.
Adam, thanks so much for letting me do a video on this and for letting me put my hands on it. It's really nice and special and super unique, and I'm just in awe that it exists.
Yeah, he got to do that. Usually we don't let people do that because the only thing that scares me about this thing is Sega painted it. That's not clear-coated. That's just paint.
Oh,
the
wow.
actual plastic color is white. There's a couple of chips from before I had it. I can prove that with old photos because I take good care of it. But yeah, there's just little white fragments under it. That's the actual plastic color. So like theoretically you could scratch it and ruin it. So that's the only part that scares me. But as you can see, I do a pretty good job of protecting.
Definitely, definitely. You've got like an armor.
Oh, I've got
cocoon
a whole. There's a cocoon of layers that keeps this thing safe.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's so cool, man. It is so cool. And like I said, congrats on being the dude. I couldn't see any other dude being the dude to take care of it.
It's just a unique set of. This is what I was saying to you before. Like, there's a bunch of skill sets that you have, and you can combine them into something. You can end up in weird situations because you're the only person qualified to do it. Or in my case, willing. There's definitely people qualified. Anybody who's qualified to be like, oh, this is a stupid thing. Let me just walk around with it.
Yeah.
But not everybody's uniquely capable of doing that. Right. I guess.
Yeah. But you're the man. You're the responsible man.
Irresponsible, but it worked.
Irresponsibly responsible.
Yes.
That's a good way to describe it.
Sure, why not?
Well, dude, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to be here with us, and you. You're both very inspiring.
We both know why I'm here.
Yeah. Well, be sure to check out Adam's channel. He's got a flying and eating channel as well, where you can see probably the Sega Pluto.
It shows up.
It shows up from time to time. But there's also a lot of cool places that he gets to visit on the regular, as well as all the cool food and stuff too. So I'll put everything in the link in the description below. Thank you for subscribing and watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to Adam as well, and I'll catch you guys at the next video. Bye. Goodbye.